Welcome to the fourth program of Road to Republic. I am Miles Eversley.
And I'm Joshua Hinkson. Thanks for joining us. In our previous programs, we discussed Barbados' political history and past efforts to transition towards Republican status. Now, in this program, we focus on the views of our people. But before that, there is no doubt that public education is key in any policy decision, especially in cases of constitutional reform. Professor Velma Newton briefly discusses the importance of this major step in Barbados' history.
We have to educate them as to the meaning of independence or republicanism. That the main change will be that we'll have a Barbadian as the head of state, that conditions, economic conditions will not change, because I know some of them have asked questions as to whether the British government would punish us, whether the British government would not come to our aid, and etc. What we have to say to those persons is that at present, Barbados does not benefit substantially from any aid from the British government, not more so than any other countries that might apply for grants and so on, but they're not just giving us money to help us stay afloat. That largely has to be us using the resources we have and following the directions that our leaders are trying to forge for us, and that basically nothing is going to change. We'll still have to rely on government to assist us in finding more housing, in maintaining our roads, trying to ensure that there's not price gouging, and so on. All the things that are happening right now will continue. I don't think there's any reason for delaying moving towards what is inevitable or should be inevitable if we think of ourselves as persons who will move from what we were, and this is the majority of us, what we were 3 centuries ago and up to 50, 60 years ago to now. I see absolutely no reason for delay. Educate and sensitize and all of the rest, but I don't think any right-thinking Barbadians could possibly see that, once they know the facts, could possibly think that it's to our detriment to become a republic.
During this series, we featured several high-profile figures giving their opinions on various issues. We now hear what Barbados becoming a republic means to them.
It means that we are truly, in the total sense, our own people. We will still remain as one of the Commonwealth because it's useful to us. But we don't take any instructions from London when we become a republic.
Well, it means a lot of things to me. Not just that we'll have a Barbadian as a head of state, but it means that we've come of age. We've moved from centuries of slavery through emancipation, through the Moyne Commission that recommended changes in Barbados that affected the majority of the working class who were living in abject poverty and had always been, through to the recommendations made by the Moyne Commission for better education, for better housing, and to a limited extent for involving Barbadians, and I mean not just one segment of the Barbadian population, in the government of the country. Because after the Moyne report, we had a movement to a form of ministerial government with Sir Grantley Adams as Premier, and then we moved to universal adult suffrage in 1951, and then through to a fuller form of self-government for Barbados to the independence in 1966. But the Independence Constitution of Barbados was attached to an Ordering Council of the British government. And as you would have heard or heard yourself, while the powers of the Governor General are largely ceremonial, and people keep emphasizing this, the Governor General, he or she, still wields a fair amount of influence in that appointments to services commissions and so on have to be done on the recommendation of the Prime Minister through the Governor General. So the Governor General has quite a full load. It's not just going to birthday parties and that sort of thing. She has some serious roles. And I think the time has come now that her powers and the role she plays should be played by someone who is elected by Barbadians, albeit through an indirect process, but the election is by persons whom we have elected to represent us in Parliament.
So to me, it lifts from me what I call that badge of shame. If I can give you one little anecdote, I remember some years ago going to Syria. I was in Damascus, and I was in a taxi, and the Syrian taxi driver asked, "Where are you from?" I said, "Barbados." He said, "Oh, is it an independent country?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Who's your head of state?" I said, "Well, the Queen of England is our head of state." He said to me, "But I thought you said Barbados was an independent country." I said, "Yes, it's an independent country." "And who's your head of state?" "The Queen of England is our head of state." And the man dismissed me. The man was done talking to me after that. The man dismissed me as a total idiot. The man told me, "You cannot be independent if the Queen of England is your head of state." And I tell you, this is not singular to that Syrian taxi driver. Up to today, there are Barbadians who have serious doubts that Barbados is truly independent, simply because the Queen of England is still our head of state. And so we owe it to ourselves to remove that source of doubt, to remove that anachronism, so that it is clear to every single Barbadian that yes, this country is independent. It stands on its own 2 feet. It makes its own way in the world, and it will handle its own affairs.
It certainly will give me a sense of satisfaction that we have repatriated the Constitution, and we are well capable of doing that, running our own affairs. We've been doing it ever since 1966. To become a republic would be symbolic of a sense of pride and an identity that is different from an identity as a Bajan under a monarchical system. But in terms of, well, what I anticipate as to how we will function as a republic, there will be little difference between what happens now and what will happen under a republic. The thing is that whereas technically the Queen is currently the head of state, and the Governor General is kind of agent to the Queen, in future, a Barbadian will be the head of state. That will be the essential difference. And it is time that happens. We are not going to have an executive presidency like you have in Guyana. So a lot of it, as I say, is symbolism, because after 55 years, it is time for us to remove the yoke of the colonial past We have the ability to do it. We must do it. And nothing for Barbadians to be afraid of. I was involved last time when we were examining the possibility of becoming a republic. After the 1999 election, the manifesto of Barbados Party had Owen Arthur's face on it, and we committed to having Barbados become a republic. And we'd set up the commission under Sir Henry Ford. And they did important work. You must go back. It's important to read that report because a lot of work was done. And I suspect that a lot of the recommendations of that report will inform the latest version that is being worked on now.
The implications of being a republic, it goes beyond just the head of state. It says to us that the principles we must now try to solidify are that Barbados must be a society of social equality. Barbados must be a meritocracy where people advance not based on family background, but on their own intrinsic merit, where people must therefore be given opportunities to develop all of their talents and abilities, and that must not simply depend on whether they come from a wealthy family. So Barbados must now become a society where unearned social privilege must be dismantled, where a really democratic and egalitarian ethos.
Ambassador Thomas Young outlined his vision for a new Barbados, with social equality being chief among his desires. The ambassador can rest assured Barbadians are also in that frame of mind. From the time of independence, any huge political or constitutional change has always been seen as an opportunity to advance social and economic equality in our country. Now let's look back at the wishes of our people at that one-year anniversary of our independence and compare them to the wishes of the people now as Barbados is on the cusp of becoming a republic.
Can you tell me what you think about the first year of our independence?
Well, at first I wasn't very sure about it, but after seeing that the year has passed so successfully, I think we have really done a great deal.
And what about the future? What do you hope we can do?
Well, I hope we can do much more, especially in the field of education and foreign affairs.
Towards the end of our first year, I think the thoughts of the association moved away a bit from the political side to the economic side. And I think this is the thing which is causing the association some concern. The development of tourism, the future of our industrial, our attempted industrial development, all these things are matters which interest the association very much.
Well, I feel the first year of independence was very great for Barbadians, and I feel that in years to come it should be much more to the younger generation because, well, it's a great asset to the island, I believe, and people should look forward more to it as the years roll over.
Oh, well, I think as far as independence is concerned, it's a good thing. And it holds the future for the younger generation.
As far as I'm concerned, quite a lot have been accomplished during the first year. Of course, there are many more years to come, and we can't really look at 1 year's performance. Nevertheless, I think that, as I've foresaid, that the year past has been a reasonably fruitful one, and I think with everybody pulling their weight in years to come, our independence will indeed bear fruit.
Well, what I must say, that we look forward to it, and we are praying God, that He will work out everything to His best ability. Amen.
The voices of our people, November 1967, 1 year after independence, as they reflected on the past year. 54 years later, we hear the voices of our people on the road to republic.
What I can say is that it could be a stepping stone for Barbados, as it is. Most of the countries, major countries in the Caribbean, have already gone republic. I guess as time goes on, we will see how we progress, if it's going to benefit us as a stepping stone within the Caribbean, as one of the leading Caribbean countries.
For me, this occasion is significant. I wasn't here in 1966 when Barbados achieved independence, but I am here in 2021 on the occasion of Barbados becoming a republic. This is something that we should celebrate as part of our nation building journey, and I'm delighted to be part of this historic moment right here in beautiful Barbados.
Well, we're going to be independent, you understand? So I think it's a good thing.
I think that Barbados being independent needs to really cut ties with the Queen. If we're independent, we're independent.
We're well overdue. About time.
Definitely, it represents a colonial past that I think we should move away from. But what the Brits do in Britain, really shouldn't have much implication for what we do here. So that's an argument for removing the Queen as our head of state.
I would like to see us become more regionally integrated with the other countries in the Caribbean, because how we expect to compete on the global market, just this little dot that you could barely see on the map.
Quite frankly, I would hope that the Barrow vision could finally come home. If by becoming a republic, we are able to liberate the minds and consciousness of the Barbadian public, then it is worth it.
I feel it's time, man, we go. I just feel it's time. And we go by ourselves, We break away independence so we can build a republic.
I hope for the future, if it got republic, I hope things go good in behalf of the people that live here in Barbados.
Bring better things for the youth, because now it's young days, old days no more. So we all have to do is hope for the best.
While we expect the social and economic concerns of the Barbadian public to be addressed in the political arena, we shift our attention back to the institutions of Barbados which are under review. Our Parliament, which consists of the House of Assembly and the Senate, are up for discussion by political scientists as well as former and current politicians. Fundamental changes to our Parliament are not uncommon. From the time of emancipation, Parliament has undergone many changes, including the abolition of double-member constituencies, more seats in the House of Assembly, and more persons being eligible for the contest of elections after the removal of income requirements. We will now look at a debate about the Senate, which is often seen as a rubber stamp on government's proposals. This means it merely approves whatever is sent its way. Some argue for the abolition of the Senate, which would make Barbados's parliament unicameral, or one with a single chamber.
My own perception is that what we're going to have is Republican status, rather like Trinidad, where the head of state, and this has been the big issue, where the head of state is a Barbadian. Now, in many republics, the head of state is the chief executive officer of the country, and in many republics, the head of state is an elected president. We're getting the impression from whatever discussion has taken place that we will simply have a head of state who is a Barbadian nominated by the Prime Minister, in rather the same way that the Governor General is nominated. We haven't had any significant discussion on the other aspects of the Constitution. So the issue of whether we continue to have a parliament with 30 elected members, and whether the issue of the opposition role is as it is in the Constitution, and you know that the 30 to love situation produced a major problem because of how the Constitution was set out. We don't know whether there has been any discussion about whether Parliament would remain the same with its lower house of elected 30 people and its upper house of nominated people of 21. That has not really been discussed. There was more discussion on that in my films for the Parliament's 375th anniversary, because we had a lot of discussion on the nature of Parliament at that time. Dame Billy's view on it, since the Senate did not appear to act as anything other than a rubber stamp by its constitution, Dame Billy came up with the idea, which one or two others have mentioned, and it was, I think, supported by Sir Frederick Smith, that we should have a unicameral legislature.
Yeah, I mean, I respected the Senate, of course I had to, but it's just that the Senate was, for me, still is, a rubber stamping institution. It would be a very rare occasion when something would have to go back, either for the lawyers in the relevant chambers to correct or amend, or, because there may be an amendment, you know, and there are some people who would say, well, it gives the younger people a chance to get a feel. That wasn't the case. It was older people in the Senate, you know, people who were experienced and so on. If I had my way, there would be no Senate. If I had my way, there would be one big house. And you would have maybe a few more people, but never an even number.
And there are some countries which have a unicameral, which means one group. Now, that one group would have to therefore comprise a number of elected people and a number of nominated people. But again, you would have the same situation of how the nominees are made in terms of who nominates how many and so on. In theory, it might have the same number, it might have the same ratio of people by government, opposition, and Governor General or President. But in practice, it would require considerable debate and discussion. It might in theory save money because you'll have one meeting of one chamber as opposed to two meetings, and it might be less work for the supporting system and the supporting staff. But what has happened in recent times is rather interesting, because within months of this government, a piece of legislation was turned back by the opposition and the independent senators in the absence of some government senators. And it recently happened with the Integrity Bill. So there is much discussion in the country about that situation, because I wrote, and I said in the Senate on many occasions, following my filming with Sir Frederick and others, I wrote and I said in the Senate that the Constitution of Barbados needs to add one or two more opposition senators so that the Senate can really play its role and not just be an expensive rubber stamp. Well, now all you need to have is a few government senators stay home and the independent senators don't act independently, and you can vote down a government wish. And so we have a situation where one of the strong manifesto promises of the manifesto on the corruption bill, which was going to come to Parliament as a priority, has now been sent back by the independent and opposition senators. So it creates issues, and it shows how complex representation is. Because if you have a unicameral legislature, the same thing can actually happen, and you haven't got the theoretical backup. It is very interesting that we have finally, after 55 years of independence, that we have finally had a situation where a bill is sent back by the Senate.
My whole opinion about the Senate is that the Senate should be an elected chamber. It is madness to think that the Senate can really be relevant if the government appoints 12 senators, Governor General 7, and the opposition 2. That's 21. Almost every bill that comes to the Senate will pass. If the government brings it, it will pass. Sometimes even if they disagree with it, it will pass. Because the senator who disagrees with the bill and speaks against or votes against it, his appointment is at the Prime Minister's pleasure. The Prime Minister could then revoke him immediately. So you don't have honest opinions in the Senate. The government side has to, they have to toe the line. But if a senator were elected on his own, you couldn't remove him so easily. You couldn't remove him at all. But the Prime Minister says so, right? And I feel it should not be elected by constituencies. I feel it should be elected by the country as a whole. The Senate should not be partisan. As a matter of fact, political parties should not be allowed to run for the Senate. Individuals should run. And it would be like an audit committee of the government. Make sure the government behaves.
I think that there's much to be said for having a bicameral body because it gives an opportunity for a delay and for further reflection on some matters. And I was in the Senate for 13 years. Often in the Senate there was more discussion on some matters than in the House of Assembly. There are different interest groups are supposed to be in the Senate. Yeah. So the discussions were often, to me, and I hope nobody will get me for this, were often more useful than in the House of Assembly. So I would think there's a place for the Senate in its current form. As for its the distribution, I have no comment on that at this stage, but I will say that I think it's useful to retain the Senate.
Sweeping changes to the Parliament may be on the cards, and we must not forget the Judiciary. Retired Chief Justice Sir David Simmons and Regional Project Director of Impact Justice, Professor Velma Newton, discuss.
Up to a few years ago when I did a paper, the Chief Magistrate was Chief Magistrate only in name, but there was no real differential in salary. You can't call somebody chief of something and he's having the same salary as those who are under him. You know? So they need to put that has been knocking around there for all the years. I tried to get it changed, they wouldn't change it, but it needs to be. It's untidy. Give the Chief Magistrate powers island-wide and give him some, not only the status in name, but in actuality, and pay him properly. So, and the other thing is, we do not have a senior magistrate. In other words, what I would advocate is a hierarchic structure for the magistracy. Chief magistrate, senior magistrate, and then other magistrates. And you might have two seniors, but that's the detail that can be worked out. As a result of my experience with a previous Prime Minister, I'm going to be sending a memorandum probably next week to Dr. Williams' committee asking that the Constitution be changed. A, to remove the retiring age distinction between High Court judges and Court of Appeal judges. Right now, High Court judges can go at 65, but must go at 67. And at 65, they can ask for an extension. And they have to write to the Prime Minister. And I think we need to get out of that, of relying on a politician to determine whether you get an extension of your tenure for 2 years or not. And the way to do that is standardize the age. Everybody, well, my thing is that all judges, because the Court of Appeal, just let me explain, in the Court of Appeal, you can go to 70, but you must go at 72 if you get an extension. I don't know why there's a differential between the High Court and the Court of Appeal. All judges, people are living longer now, and all of them are mentally agile. I would have thought that we should standardize the age. For me, I don't care what they say. That's a policy decision for the government. But I would say, let everybody go at 72 and cut out this need for, as it were, begging for an extension. That's unseemly. And in my case, you saw what happened.
At present, and since 1974, when I think it was Prime Minister Barrow at the time, made a change to the Constitution to provide that the Prime Minister should, in consultation with the Leader of the Opposition, should recommend who is Chief Justice. And that has stayed with us. At the time, there was a lot of hullabaloo about it because it was a change people thought should not have been made without the input of the people. But the noticeable thing is that no government since then has sought to change it, which means that the provision was probably working without the level of partiality that critics at the time thought would result. My view is that the Chief Justice should be appointed on the recommendation of both the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister. And I believe that was the recommendation made by the Ford Commission as well. And the recommendation will be made to the Governor General, who would issue the instruments of appointment. So.
The office of the Prime Minister is often seen as quite a powerful one, and in political science it is described as an elected dictatorship. The office traditionally had input in the selection of judges, service commission members, and the Governor General, but that has since changed.
I am conscious that I've taken the decision as Prime Minister of this nation to abandon powers that every other previous Prime Minister has had. I do so as a child of independence, and as a child who would have been expected to walk this journey by the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams, who gave us that right to vote, and by the Right Excellent Earl Walton Barrow, who gave us that step into independence. And what are those powers that have been reduced? Mr. Speaker, prior to today, this country had 8 governors general. Sir John Montagu Stowe was appointed by a Prime Minister in consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. Sir Arley Winston Scott was similarly appointed. Sir Dighton Lyle Ward was similarly appointed. Sir Hugh Springer was similarly appointed. Dame Nita Barrow was similarly appointed. Sir Clifford Husbands was similarly appointed. Sir Elliot Belgrave was similarly appointed. And the person who has the honor to be our first president-elect was similarly appointed by the previous Prime Minister, consulting with me as Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, hereinafter, we have shown today that that power of the appointment to a head of state shall not be the gift of a Prime Minister, absolutely with just this requirement to consult the Leader of the Opposition. But it now carries itself to the reflection of confidence in our highest offices of representational politics, the Parliament of this nation, the joint houses of the Parliament of this nation. And if we are to recall what sovereignty truly is, sovereignty is the power in a state to do everything necessary to govern itself. And in a republic, the state in which sovereignty resides is in the people and in the representative offices of the people. That we can now have this high power reside in the parliament of this nation rather than in the office of a single person, even though they be prime minister, is a significant advancement in the democracy of this nation. And Mr. Speaker, it doesn't come on its own, because we have taken similar decisions for the Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee as established by law by this Parliament to ensure that even in the appointment of Chief Justice and judges of the High Court and the Court of Appeal now, those decisions will no longer be taken by a Prime Minister of this nation acting once again in conjunction, in consultation rather, with the Leader of the Opposition, but are now taken on the basis of recommendations made by a Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee to the Prime Minister.
Dr. George Bell explains the concept of an elected dictatorship and gives his views on the matter.
Yeah, well, there is that narrative that that the Prime Minister is in fact a dictatorship, a dictator, an elected dictator. Okay, and I've heard Dennis Johnson on calling program a couple of times using this illustration again from Trinidad, where he says this conference was going on, and somebody from the floor told Eric Williams, you know what we should have in Trinidad is a prime ministerial dictatorship. And Williams answered, and what do you think you have? If you follow the logic of what I said before, we could understand how that would happen. If you have a very dominant prime minister in a cabinet, remember that the prime minister is first among equals. He can fire and hire the cabinet minister. There's no challenge to that. That is the power of the prime minister. So if there's a prime minister that's going to tell you, like it is alleged Eric Williams did say to, all of you ministers must give me an unsigned letter of resignation, and I will fill in the date. Well, you don't have to ask if he's a dictator, okay? And if you don't agree with him, well, just in a sense, theoretically though, if you are a minister in a cabinet and you don't agree with the prime minister, you're supposed to resign. Because the way that the prime minister, from what I am told, is allowed to make decisions, and I've seen it, for instance, at the university level, in council with the chancellor. And the chancellor normally don't have a lot of powers, the vice chancellor, okay? But the chancellor at council meetings has power, because he is in charge of the council. And one of the ways in which he expresses that power is to say what is the opinion of council, and they don't put it to the vote. I heard a chancellor say, it is the opinion of council, and he hadn't asked for the vote. And the prime minister can also say, it is the opinion of this cabinet, and if you don't like it, resign, because I am the prime minister, okay? I heard how recently somebody said of Earl Barra in St. Philip in relation to, I think it was St. Philip South at the time, that he wanted a particular candidate as the member of parliament to run for St. Philip South. But Barra went up there and said, this is the person I want to run up here. And if you all don't want him, find a new leader. But they had the choice. What new leader were they going to find? So they had to bow. And if a prime minister can do that in cabinet, and then the cabinet can do that in the party, and the party has the majority in the parliament, that is the basis for saying that there's a prime ministerial dictatorship. That's how you get to that conclusion. Yeah. And I'm saying that the advantage of it, if there's an advantage, is that it gives the majority some certainty in getting their will through Parliament. Because the Prime Minister, on the other hand, as the leader of a party that won an election, is supposed to be the champion of the masses. So when you start to undermine that, who is the champion of the masses? You ain't got no champion of the masses. You ain't got nobody that can ensure the will of the people through Parliament on the basis of dominance. And then you get a weak Prime Minister. And then when you get a weak Prime Minister, what do you get? You get a whole lot of influences coming in then to say who should do what where, and these people ain't elected. So the question is, have you changed something that was better for something that is worse? So that is why it is not so straightforward when people jump up and say, the Prime Minister got too much power, let's reduce the Prime Minister. What you might do is you might give too much power to somebody else who don't even come to you to face you in elections. So that is what you have to address and discuss and analyze in relation to whether you can come to an easy conclusion that the Prime Minister is a dictator and the Prime Minister has too much power.
Our guests have discussed what the Republic means to them, possible changes to the branches of government, and we have heard from our people on their expectations for the future. So here are some final recommendations for Barbados.
Another thing would be the oath of allegiance that you take. Well, that has to change, because you're no longer swearing allegiance to Her Majesty, her heirs and successors. And the oath that we take as ministers or Prime Minister when you're sworn in. It's a long, convoluted thing without any commas or full stops. And talking about not disclosing a vote of cabinet, you don't vote in cabinet. It's foolishness out there. A short thing. Let me swear allegiance to the Constitution and to my country, Barbados. And, you know, if I'm sworn in as a minister to do right by all people, do something. We can find some words, you know, in 5 lines that express everything we want to say. But this nonsense that, well, you saw it when the last cabinet had the thing on the Sunday afternoon in Bay Street. The people coming up and saying all this convoluted nonsense. And Trevor Prescott laughing at it. No. Let us frame and fashion something that represents what we are and what we want.
I believe that Barbados and CARICOM, and I've said so within CARICOM, we should have a more activist foreign policy, or let's say a more active foreign policy. We, because of where we have come from, I think we, of all people, need to be the champions and defenders of the principles of freedom, of dignity for all people, but particularly dignity for black people. We should be the arch enemies of all notions of racism and racial discrimination. We should be the champions par excellence of universal human rights, because we of all people, we know what it is for hundreds of years of our history to be deprived of human rights, to be the victims of oppression. So if we could consolidate that idea of who we are, what role we need to play in this world, yes, it could have implications for national policies. It could also have implications for our foreign policy in terms of playing a more dynamic role in international affairs.
I'd like to see the provisions for citizenship expanded, and the Constitution Review Commission would have looked at the situation then. And I know since 1998 there have been some changes made. Unfortunately, I can't tell you all that they were, but I think they were moving in the direction that the Commission recommended. And I would like to see that step, to see those recommendations put in place. One of the recommendations had been that we move to have our own final court, CCJ. That has happened. I mentioned before that there were recommendations made for dealing with the public services on our finances. I would like to see them looked at carefully. I would like to see also that, and this is not, this is to do with the Bill of Rights. At the time, it was argued that making provisions for the elderly and persons with disabilities and sexual orientation and so on should not necessarily be dealt with in the Constitution. In fact, the Commission came to the conclusion that recommendations to do with sexual orientation, there were few and were not pressing. Yeah? But certainly, say to deal with look at persons with disabilities. There's been a convention, UN convention, on dealing with persons with disabilities. Impact Justice is now doing a study throughout the region. And while I do not think, I sort of agree that you do not want to put extensive provisions in the Constitution because you will not be able to do all of them. I still think that persons with disabilities and the elderly could still be included among the persons that should be protected from discrimination. But at the same time, there should be disabilities legislation, which includes the provisions of the UN Convention. That has been promised a long time too. That was promised at the time of the Ford Commission, and nothing has been done. And Barbados is not alone in that. Across the region, I think it is only Antigua, Guyana and Jamaica, I think, that have legislation for persons with disabilities. And evidence is that the persons with disabilities, and notice I didn't say disabled persons, because that is a no, that term has changed. It's now persons with disabilities. Evidence before us has been that a lot of them feel marginalized, they're often heckled and, and that this is something that, especially as our populations are growing older, that governments around the region should pay some attention to and make sure that they enact legislation to deal with the elderly, who in another few years are going to be probably the largest segment of the population, and rather than later. Yeah. And that they could be mentioned in the fundamental rights and freedoms section of the Constitution as persons who should not be discriminated against.
So I think it's a very interesting discussion. I suspect that after the planning that goes on with the Transition Committee, that we will have a Trinidad-type republic, and that the Governor-General, like the President of Trinidad, will come home. Whether the Transition Committee will set up a further subsequent progeny of it to become a later Transition Committee to discuss wider constitutional changes, to discuss whether the role of the President should change from being a rubber stamp, which is really what the role of the Governor-General is, in theory representing the Queen, but really a rubber stamp. So my own idea is that if there are things that cannot be settled by public discussion, debate, referendum, or otherwise in the remaining few months leading up to the 30th of November, I would have suggested to the Transition Committee that they might recommend a progeny, a child, an infant, a Transition Committee number 2, so that after the 30th of November there can be further discussion, debate, referenda, if have you, to decide if we want to change our Constitution in any radical way.
I think that we have certain deficiencies in our governance system, not only in terms of the head of state, but in terms of having a system that permits people participation in governance, decision making, in the administration of affairs in their communities. And I have had the privilege over the last 2 years or so to be the deputy chairperson of the Thorn Commission on Local Governance. And we have consulted with the Barbadian people. We held town hall meetings all across the 11 parishes of Barbados. And based on the collective input of the Barbadian people, we have developed a proposal for a system of people's assemblies, which would perfectly complement the move towards the Republic by the 30th of November this year, because what that People's Assembly would do, just as we are making that transformation at the top of the system with the head of state, at the base of the system now, the People's Assemblies would usher in a new era of involvement by all Barbadians in their system of governance, in exercising power at the community level, but also in being given the opportunity to hold central government policymakers accountable, to put things on the national parliamentary agenda, and so forth. So these are the kinds of things that we need to do to complement the transformation that will be taking place at the apex of the structure. So the way we need to think about becoming a republic is we need to understand the core of that Republican principle. It is about the people. The people must own their nation. The people must own their government. It is about democratic equality. It is turning its back on notions of social power based on skin color or based on family background or any concept of aristocracy, special birth and special families. And I would even say it needs to turn its back on the notion that that wealth, that money should give one special privilege and special power in the society. It is saying no, all power comes from the people. And all of the people are equal. They're equal beings in the sight of God and in the sight of the Constitution of our country.
Well, Josh, I hope our viewers have found this program informative and enjoyable.
Well, I certainly hope so too. Indeed, it was a pleasure. Happy 55th Independence, Barbados, and cheers to the new republic. Until next time, I'm Joshua Hinkson.
And I'm Miles Eversley. Goodbye.